Part 1. The Unspoken Tradition. I never thought much about the ritual. It was just something we did, like carving pumpkins in October or fireworks on the 4th of July. Every town has its traditions, right? Ours just happened to be different. We called it the keeping. Once a year, on the night of February 13th, every single person in my town, no exceptions, locked their doors, turned off all their lights, and followed the rules. Not guidelines, not suggestions. Rules. And we were forbidden to speak about them. Ever. I was born here, grew up knowing about the keeping before I even understood what it was. It's just what we do. My mother would say when I asked why we had to pretend our town didn't exist for one night each year, "It keeps us safe." Safe from what? I never got an answer. But when you grow up in a place like this, you learn fast. You don't break the rules. But last year, someone did. And I wish to God I didn't know what happens when you do. It started with Ben Murphy. Ben was my best friend since first grade, the kind of guy who always pushed the limits just to see what would happen. He wasn't reckless, exactly, but he had that look in his eye like he wanted the universe to challenge him. And when he turned 17, he decided that the keeping was a joke. "This whole town is full of shit," he told me a week before the keeping. "Nobody even knows why we do it. It's just some stupid tradition." Ben, think about it, Dylan. Every single house in town goes dark. No one makes a sound. And we all pretend like we're hiding from monsters. He scoffed. "What happens if we don't?" "Huh." I swallowed hard. I didn't want to say it. He smirked. "That's the thing. Nobody actually knows. Because no one's ever broken the damn rules." I should have told him to stop. I should have begged him not to do it. But Ben had already made up his mind. And when the night of the keeping came, he left his lights on. The rules of the keeping. By sundown, all doors must be locked. All windows must be covered. All lights must be turned off. No one speaks. No one moves. No one makes a sound. If you hear something outside, no you didn't. The last one always scared me the most. I sat in my bedroom that night, curled under my blankets, heart pounding. The darkness in my room felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing in on me. The whole town was dead silent. No TVs, no music, not even a damn cricket chirping. That's how it always was. But this time, there was something else. A light, a faint glow coming from 2 houses down, Ben's house. I could see it through the tiny gap in my curtains. And then, the knocking started. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frantic. It was slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 more knocks, then silence. My skin crawled. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath coming fast and shallow. My parents' bedroom was across the hall, but I didn't dare move. Then, after the longest silence yet, screech, a sound like nails raking down a metal door. My stomach flipped. Something wasn't right. The air in my room felt colder. The hairs on my arms stood up. Then came the worst part. The voice. It wasn't a normal voice. It was layered, thick, and unnatural. Like 10 people speaking at once, just under a whisper. "We see you." I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. "Come outside, Ben." My hands clamped over my ears, but it didn't help. That voice wasn't just coming from outside. It was in my head. Then a scream. Ben's voice. Raw. Terrified. Then nothing. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking, my pulse hammering against my ribs. The knocking never came again. Neither did the voice. When the sun finally rose, I ran to Ben's house. The front door was wide open. His parents were gone. And so was Ben. No one ever spoke about him again. Not the police, not his neighbors. No missing posters. No investigation. It was like he'd never existed. But I remember. And next week, the keeping happens again. I don't know what I'm more afraid of. The fact that Ben broke the rules, or the fact that whatever came for him might want more this year. Part 2. The things that knock. Ben Murphy never existed. That's what they wanted me to believe. His house sat empty for months after the last keeping. His parents, gone. The official story was that they moved away in the middle of the night. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. just vanished, and no one questioned it. It was like the whole town had been reset. I brought Ben up once, just once, to my mom. She froze. Her face turned a shade paler, and for a second, I thought she was going to be sick. Then she grabbed my wrist so hard it hurt. "You don't say his name, ever." Her eyes darted to the front window. The sun was still up, but that didn't seem to comfort her. "Why?" I whispered. She swallowed hard. Then, in a voice so quiet I barely heard it, "Because they might still be listening." 1 year later, the next keeping was 6 days away. I wasn't ready. I kept having nightmares about Ben's house, about the knocking, about the voice. The worst part? I could barely remember what Ben looked like anymore. Like my brain was erasing him against my will. I had to dig through an old yearbook just to make sure he was real. That's when I started noticing things. 1. The yearbook photo was blurry. His name was there, but his face? A smudge, like the ink had melted. 2. No one else seemed to remember him. I tried bringing him up casually to some kids at school. "Man, I miss Ben." They just stared at me like I was speaking gibberish. 3. His house wasn't empty anymore. This was the part that made my stomach drop. 3 nights before the keeping, I walked past Ben's old house on the way home. The windows were still covered in dust, the grass knee-high, but the front door was open. Not just cracked, wide open. And from where I stood on the sidewalk, I could see a light. A single lamp was on, flickering like a dying candle. My skin went ice cold. Someone or something was inside. The dare. I should have kept walking. I should have ignored it, pretended I didn't see a damn thing. But then Jason and Cole had to open their big mouths. "Hey, Dylan." Jason clapped me on the back, smirking. "What's the matter? You look like you saw a ghost." I swallowed. "Ben's house." They glanced at it. Then Jason rolled his eyes. "Dude, no one lives there." "There's a light on," I muttered. Cole squinted. "Ha, you're right." Jason grinned, nudging me. "Well, go check it out." My pulse spiked. "Are you insane?" "Oh, come on," Jason laughed. "It's just an empty house." He tilted his head mockingly. "Or are you scared of a little keeping story?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell them that the things outside Ben's house last year weren't human. But my pride wouldn't let me. So I took a deep breath and walked up the steps. Inside Ben's house, the door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside was wrong. Cold, thick, stale. Like no one had breathed in here for a year. The light flickered from the living room, casting long, jerky shadows across the floor. Something smelled off, rotten. I took a slow step inside. The boards groaned under my weight. Behind me, Jason and Cole snickered from the sidewalk. "Ooh-hoo. Dylan's in the haunted house." I ignored them. The living room looked the same as I remembered, except for one thing. A chair sat in the middle of the room directly under the light. And on the chair, a notebook. My throat went dry. I stepped closer, my sneakers scuffing against the wood. Dust swirled in the dim glow. Ben's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. February 13th, 11:23 p.m. The knocking won't stop. I flipped the page. February 13th, 11:47 p.m. They see me. My pulse pounded. February 14th, 12:06 a.m. Something is inside the house. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze. The air in the house shifted. Suddenly, it didn't feel empty anymore. Something was here, watching, listening. Then, knock, knock, knock. My blood ran cold. Not from outside, from upstairs. The same slow, deliberate rhythm from last year. Knock, silence. Knock, silence. I stepped back toward the door. My foot hit something, Ben's notebook. It had slipped from my fingers. And on the last page, there was something I hadn't seen before. A message written in thick, jagged letters. "Don't look up." A floorboard groaned above me. Couldn't help it. I looked up, and hanging upside down from the ceiling, its smiling face inches from mine, was Ben. But his eyes were all wrong. They were black, and they weren't blinking. Part 3. the smiling thing that wears his face. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Ben was hanging upside down from the ceiling, his head twisted at an impossible angle. His lips curled into a grin that stretched too wide, like his skin was barely holding something inside. His eyes solid black, empty holes. I wanted to scream, but my voice had died somewhere deep in my throat. Ben blinked, slow and deliberate. His body twitched, jerking like a puppet on broken strings. Then his mouth moved, not speaking, stretching. And then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was the voice from last year, the one from outside his house, the one that had whispered his name. You saw. The air turned thick. My lungs felt heavy, like I was breathing in something rotten. You looked. Ben's head snapped violently to one side, crack. His grin never faltered. Now you listen. A sharp pressure stabbed into my skull. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was inside my head, a scraping, twisting, crawling noise, like fingernails dragging against bone. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped, and Ben was gone. I ran. I don't remember how I got out of the house. 1 second, I was staring at the empty ceiling. The next, I was sprinting down the sidewalk, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would shatter my ribs. Jason and Cole must have seen my face, because their laughter died instantly. What the hell, dude? Jason grabbed my arm. What happened in there? I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I just turned and ran. The new rule. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my room, staring at my hands, feeling the weight of something I didn't understand pressing against my skull. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Then I remembered the notebook. I had dropped it when I ran, but I still had one page. It must have torn free in the chaos, because when I emptied my pockets, there it was. One last message, written in Ben's jagged scrawl. There's another rule. They don't tell us everything. If you break the rules, they take you. If you look, they let you go. But you're not alone anymore. My hands shook, because I already knew. I could feel it. Something was in my room, watching, waiting, listening. Part 4. It knows my name. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at my bedroom door, feeling the air around me shift. The room felt wrong, like something was sitting in the dark corners, just out of sight, watching me, listening. Every now and then, I thought I heard it. Faint breath, the rustle of fabric, the slow, almost playful tap, 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 against my window. But when I turned my head, nothing. Still, I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. The rule no one talks about. By morning, the feeling hadn't left. If anything, it had gotten worse. It was in the hallway when I walked to the bathroom. It was at my back when I sat at the kitchen table. It was beside me when my mom spoke. You look pale, she said, sipping her coffee. Nightmares? I almost laughed. If only it were that simple. Instead, I swallowed and asked, Mom, have you ever felt something? After the keeping, her fingers froze on the coffee mug. She didn't move for a long second. Then, without looking up, she whispered, Did you break the rules? Her voice shook. I gripped the table. I thought about lying. I thought about pretending nothing had happened. But the words fell out before I could stop them. I looked. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face lost all color. She set the coffee cup down with a shaky hand and inhaled, like she was about to cry. Then she whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. It knows your name now. The mark. After that, my mom refused to speak to me. Not in the normal, mad at you kind of way. In the terrified of you way. Like I was already gone. By the time school rolled around, I felt like a ghost in my own life. Nobody else noticed anything was wrong. Nobody saw the thing standing just out of reach in my peripheral vision. Nobody but me. And then, in third period, I made the mistake of looking in the bathroom mirror. There was a mark on my neck. I leaned in close, my breath fogging the glass. It was faint, but definitely there, 3 thin, dark lines. Like something had pressed cold, bony fingers into my skin while I slept. My stomach twisted. Dylan, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Cole stood in the doorway, giving me a weird look. Dude, the bell rang like 5 minutes ago. You good? I opened my mouth, then hesitated. What was I supposed to say? No, Cole. I'm not good. I think there's something following me. I think it left a mark on me. I think I broke the rules and now I don't know what happens next. Instead, I just mumbled, yeah, just tired. He gave me a half smile. Well, get your ass to lunch before Jason eats your fries again. He left. I turned back to the mirror. My stomach dropped. The mark was darker now. The whispering starts. That night, the whispering started. First, I thought it was the wind, but then I heard my name. Dialan, soft, barely there. I gripped the sheets, squeezing my eyes shut. It wasn't real. It wasn't real. Dialan. You looked, you saw. The voice wasn't just in my room. It was inside my head. I pressed my hands over my ears. Stop, I whispered. Please, just stop. They'll come for you soon. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted blood. Then, all at once, the air changed. The temperature plummeted. I wasn't alone anymore. I felt it move. The sheets on my bed shifted. My breath hitched. Then, knock, 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 at my closet door. Slow, deliberate. Knock, silence. Knock, silence. Tears burned at my eyes. Then came the worst part. The door creaked open, and something stepped out. I didn't see it, but I felt it bend over me. Cold breath against my cheek. Then, fingers. They brushed against my neck, tracing the mark. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, in that same multi-layered voice, almost time. Then the weight lifted. The air shifted. The presence was gone. And I was left, shaking, knowing one thing for sure. This keeping was going to be different. Because this year, they weren't going to knock. They were going to let themselves in. Part 5. The keeping comes for me. The whispering didn't stop. All the next day, I heard it. Not just in my bedroom, but everywhere. In the hallways at school. Between the cracks of conversation. From empty rooms. Always my name. Dialan. Almost time. No one else reacted. No one else heard. No one but me. The final warning. At dinner, my mom wouldn't even look at me. I barely touched my food. My fork trembled in my hand. Then, just as I forced myself to take a bite, my mom whispered, "Don't sleep tonight." I froze. Her eyes were locked on her plate. Her voice was so quiet I almost thought I imagined it. "Mom, don't sleep tonight, Dylan." She pushed her chair back and left the table. I sat there, my hands going numb. Outside, the sun had set. The keeping was tonight. The night of the keeping. I didn't listen to my mom. I tried to stay awake, I really did. But the body can only handle so much fear, so much exhaustion before it gives in. At some point, my eyes slid shut. And when I woke up, it was 2:47 a.m. My room was silent. My chest felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. Then slowly I realized my closet door was open. I didn't remember leaving it open, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. But it wasn't coming from outside this time. It wasn't even coming from my closet. It was coming from under my bed. Knock, silence. Knock, silence. I gripped the sheets, my heart hammering against my ribs. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then, a hand slid out from the darkness beneath my bed. Pale, two long fingers, each tipped with something sharp. It pressed against the floor like it was dragging itself out. Then another hand. And then, I heard my own voice whisper from the dark. "Dialan." Something was wearing my voice. I tried to scream, tried to run, but my body wouldn't move. The presence crawled closer. I could feel it watching me. Then, it whispered the last words I would ever hear as just myself. "Now it's your turn." The light flickered, and the keeping took me. Epilogue. I woke up the next morning. The sun was shining. The house was normal, except I wasn't. I could feel it inside me, with me. A second set of eyes watching from the dark corners of my mind. The school, Jason and Cole greeted me like normal. I smiled, laughed, pretended nothing had changed. But something had, because that night in my bedroom, when I looked in the mirror, the reflection smiled before I did. And from the corner of the room, I heard knocking. The keeping never ends. It only finds a new name